writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, director of Kobo Writing Life. It's episode 400. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. It's really great to be able to put out this podcast every week, and I truly appreciate you tuning in. And to celebrate 400 episodes, I wanted to do a little bit behind the scenes at Kobo and talk all things self-publishing with Ashleigh Gardner, who is the Vice President of Self-Publishing and Kobo Originals here at Kobo. Ashleigh leads the global strategy for Kobo Writing Life and Kobo's original content publishing, overseeing programs designed to empower authors at every stage, expand international market reach, and to grow Kobo's original list across Europe and beyond. Ashleigh is a seasoned digital publishing executive. She worked at Kobo way back when, from 2010 to 2013, and helped to scale its independent author and content strategy. And prior to rejoining Kobo, she held a senior leadership role at Wattpad, where she focused on writer development and helped build the foundation of Wattpad Studios. Throughout her career, Ashleigh has specialized in identifying emerging talent and nurturing author careers and developing innovative publishing initiatives that turn platform writers into global successes. She is known for bridging community, content, and commercial strategy to create scalable publishing models that benefit both authors and readers. As you can see, there's so many reasons why I wanted to have Ashleigh on the podcast, as just such a wealth of knowledge, having worked at Kobo at the very beginning and then to go to Wattpad and to really see what it's like within that world, and then get to bring that all back to Kobo through Kobo Writing Life and Kobo Originals. So we go deep into the state of the industry and what is the future for indie publishing. So stay tuned, and thank you again for listening. Welcome to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, Ashleigh. I should say welcome back, because you have been on the KWL podcast before. Delighted to have you back to celebrate episode 400. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, just in case they don't remember every single episode that we've ever released? But can you tell us a little about your career and what you do here at Kobo?
First of all, congrats on 400 episodes. That's amazing, and such a long-running podcast now. It's interesting. I started at Kobo back in 2010, and to think of how far e-reading has come since then, it's pretty phenomenal. Like, I remember back then you'd still have a lot of book lovers being like, that's not really reading, or not that interested in that. And that was kind of in the early days when the device had just launched. E-reading was new. Not every publisher was even making ebooks yet, especially as we were expanding into different countries. Often every other country thought, yeah, that's popular in the US, it's not going to work here. So it's really amazing to see how much that's grown. It was great to have had a front row seat to so many of Kobo's new country launches back then. And I also had the chance, when I was here before, to work on the first project of KWL when it was a bit of a cross-functional team as a solution to all of the entrepreneurial authors that were finding ways to fax in metadata and try to send us their ebooks before we had a proper system for it. So it's amazing to see how much that has grown. I did move to Wattpad in 2013 to lead their content and writer programs. We're very lucky, and it's quite a coincidence in Toronto that two major global ebook platforms exist in the same city. I was really curious the more I heard about what they were trying to do in a different way from Kobo. Wattpad isn't so much a retailer as much as it is a social media company kind of built around storytelling in the same way Instagram's built around photos. They were really trying to encourage authors to create communities and connect with each other. And I think it was just such an interesting ecosystem where we could learn so much about reader behavior and fandom and storytelling and see those trends develop in real time. I really learned a lot about the creator economy and how writers are building their own communities and audiences. And with that lens, I'm so happy to be back here at Kobo. Now my role is VP of Self-Publishing and Originals, and I get to help support all of the amazing work that the teams are doing. I'm excited to come back with that new perspective, but with a similar goal. We're still helping authors build audiences and reach readers around the world.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have you because you have such unique experience of being so in depth in this like creator economy, indie publishing area, and to be able to bring that back to us because we all live and breathe this. But when you actually scroll out a little bit, it is kind of like a little niche industry that we're working in. So it's great to be able to have this experience. And given the work that you've done at Wattpad, because you were there for quite a while as well, and what you've done at Kobo previously, I'm just curious, but now that you're kind of back focusing on the indie author and like the Kobo Originals author experience. So, what do you think is the biggest change in how authors are finding success today versus when you started?
Again, going back to 2010, I was looking at some of my notes of like what was happening back then because it's so different. Like social media was new back then. Like we didn't have those mega successful authors on, Twitter, now X. Everything was new and emerging, and it was still novel that you could follow celebrities or authors on these new social platforms. Back then, self-publishing was so much more fringe. I think the traditional publishing industry was very dismissive of it in these early days of e-reading. But now authors can create their own platforms. They can speak directly to readers. Social media is the biggest way that books are discovered. It feels like, first it was Bookstagram and Book Talk, and I think we'll continue to see that on new emerging platforms. And also self-publishing is now leading the trends in traditional publishing rather than follow them. The books that publishers maybe wouldn't take a risk on because it didn't have a previous comp title is coming out and being self-published and is the next international bestseller. And even large traditionally published authors are beginning to experiment with self-publishing. We're seeing that rise of the hybrid author, and it now isn't necessarily a given that a self-published author will want to go and be traditionally published. Often there's less for them to be offered when they fully own that audience and that distribution. I think the biggest shift for me is power. For the first time, creators have meaningful control over their audience relationship and their intellectual property. I think it's just such a difference from where the industry was 15 years ago. And I don't think that necessarily means that it's easier because the challenge has really shifted from getting published to getting discovered. And with the influx of content that we've had from self-publishing, discovery has never been harder. It used to be that everyone would read the same books, and now there's, hundreds of thousands more books published every year. And I think the authors that are willing to engage with their readers and to experiment and focus on building that long-term audience, that's the best environment for authors today to succeed on their own terms.
I love that shift that it's not about getting published, it's about getting discovered. And that discoverability piece is so difficult, I think, especially with so many books in the world now. So yeah, it's different challenge, but a good challenge, and people seeking indie published titles to then publish them traditionally. The power is with the authors, which is wonderful. On the sort of business side of things, so when you were with Kobo at the very beginning, it was sort of like very startup vibes. I know when I started at Kobo, it was kind of that area where it felt like very techy and startup-y versus now like a very established global company. And I'm just wondering what your experience was coming back and like any differences that jumped out to you at Kobo specifically.
Yeah, it's really amazing to come back and see that level of growth across all the different departments. I had left shortly after the acquisition from Rakuten, which was transformative for Kobo and really gave it that investment and acceleration to really grow and move into new areas and invest in the award-winning devices that we have today. I think it's so exciting to come back and see the differences in new countries and new territories and business models. We hadn't launched subscription yet when I was here before, so to me that's been the most fascinating thing to dig into and learn how readers are experimenting with works in different ways, and also to see how self-publishing is really growing in this new business model. It's also amazing to see so many familiar faces. Even MT, the current CEO of Kobo, he was back there then, and there is still that same energy and mission of connecting readers with the right books and really creating a whole ecosystem and devices that book lovers will love and appreciate.
Yeah, I always think that we're very lucky that at the leading the company, our CEO is essentially a book guy, a content guy, and led by somebody that is very much an indie publishing book person. And as you're looking after both Kobo Writing Life and Kobo Originals, we talk about originals a little bit on the podcast. We interviewed some of the authors. I know Emma Davies, but can you tell listeners a little bit about it, just in case they're not too sure what the difference between Kobo Writing Life is and Kobo Originals, and just about the work that you do there? there?
I'm sure people listening to this are very familiar with what Kobo Writing Life is as the self-publishing platform of the Kobo store and the best way for authors to upload their books and make it available around the world to Kobo and our regional partners. I think what's most important about KWL is that it's non-exclusive and that you retain your full control over your decisions. And Originals, as something separate, is our publishing arm. We are fully a publisher for those titles. We invest in the full publishing process for new works and works in translation. And we use the data on what our readers are looking for to create internal bestsellers. And we can invest and accelerate their success. A lot of the top Originals works have been translations or new works from KWL authors. And so we work together on that loop. The KWL team is drawing attention to things that they think might work in other territories. And the Originals team is regularly reaching out and doing calls for works of this is what we're interested in. Does anyone have a pitch? Like everything that we do at KWL and at Kobo, it is always completely opt-in. It's for the choice of authors, but for some authors, it's a great fit to experiment with a new genre or a new market or a new work with the full support of the Originals team.
Was that translation piece surprising to you when you joined, or was that something that you were expecting?
Yeah, I think that I was expecting translations being how global Kobo is. I think one thing that I've been passionate about since even before I came here is that within publishing, translations have historically been for literary works, and that's been the perspective that publishers have taken on it. A big commercial success from Europe isn't traditionally translated into the North American market in the same way that the Booker Prize would be. And for readers, I don't think there is that same difference because what you're consuming on a page can feel the same. It's not like watching a movie with subtitles. And I think that everything that we're seeing with the whole globalization of social media and different platforms, I think translations are really primed, and it should be something that every self-published author is paying attention to, whether it's trying to find a way to leverage it through licensing to international publishers, translating it on their own, or through Kobo Originals. I think translations are a great way for authors to be reaching more readers.
Yeah, it kind of ties into what we always say at Kobo about having this globally local view of book selling, where we want the books available everywhere, but we know there are those differences in the different markets and that the need for translation still exists, even though you could be selling an English book globally. So yeah, it's super interesting to be able to see that and to be able to see how authors can get success, especially in Kobo Plus in those different areas as we expand into now. I think we're in 34 countries. So that's the regions that Kobo Plus is in right now. So that's really awesome. And as we are kind of celebrating our episode 400 here, I was just wondering, this being a North Star for the podcast, what do you think of your North Star for Kobo Writing Life over the next few years? Like what's the goal and what's the aim that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think for me, the mantra has really been around scale, both in our own internal operations. How can we support the growing authors that we're getting on the platform, but also to continue that growth across different genres, different territories, different countries, launch Kobo Plus and launch KWL in more countries. I think we're really primed to aggressively grow in the coming years. And I think we want more authors to be thinking about us as a default destination of where they should be to reach more readers around the world.
I love that. I think it's so important, especially with Kobo still being this small but mighty company taking on some of the largest companies in the world. I always think about that. You're like, our competitors are like Amazon, Google, Apple. Like it's just like we're this little platform that are trying to take them on. So I think it's really, really cool to be able to be a little bit of a part of that. We talked a little bit about the differences between indie publishing like 15 years ago versus today. But I'm curious, like what a quote unquote successful indie author looks like in 2026. Like what does that look like?
Yeah, something that stood out to me when I worked at Kobo before, when Mark Lefebvre had joined to work on KWL, is he always talked about how success is something that's so differently defined for every author and can lead to different paths depending on what you want. Do you want to write the best book that you can? Do you want the most number of people to read it? Is this going to be your career? Because so many authors define success in different ways. Even just publishing a book itself is such a huge success. I remember reading a stat once that like 90% of the population want wants to write a book one day. Only like 2% ever actually write it. Probably less than 5% of that ever actually publish it or put it out in the world. I think it's so important for authors to remain experimental and try new things. That's one of the biggest advantages that indie authors have over their traditional counterparts, is that they have full control. They can make decisions about what they want to do and how they want to do that. And I think that's often their first mover advantage over a lot of their more traditional peers. So I would say yes, to be experimental and to really know your readers to keep building that audience.
I love that about the idea about success, because I always try and remind authors, if I'm ever talking to them face to face, like, you're doing the thing that so many people talk about, but they don't actually do it. And I know it's such an isolating career where it can just be you in front of your computer and you're kind of feeling a little bit alone. But I honestly just think you should celebrate everything that you're doing, whether it's book 30 in a series or your first book in a new genre or your very first book that's come out. I think it's so important. On the flip side of this, I wonder, do you have any tips about authors? Talking about burnout is something that comes up quite a bit on this podcast, and especially with a rapid release strategy can sometimes be something that authors think that they have to go toward. Do you have any advice for authors balancing burnout within their writing career?
Yeah, especially for indie authors, a lot of those deadlines are really self-imposed. I think, like I would say to anyone, is to give yourself the right pace, the right breaks. Don't be afraid to ask for extensions if that's what you need. Like, I've seen so many authors do that, and their audiences can be so understanding. No one wants you to have to work through burnout and not write the best book that you can. And sometimes a break away from it is the best thing that you can do to come back and write the best book possible for your readers.
And sorry, I'm going off script now a little bit, but have you ever ambitions to write yourself, or have you ever written anything?
I used to always say no. Increasingly, I'm like, maybe I would. I think I was always more interested in the business of writing more so than writing. I think working in publishing, in some ways, you see how hard it can be. And, you know, there is something that they talk about that every author I know talks about. It's like, I just had to write this book. I just had to get it out. And I've never really felt that urgency. But I think increasingly I've been knocking around some ideas, and I think maybe I would. My grandfather was an author. That was his career. He wrote spy novels in the 60s. And so it was always a bit of like talked about as a family thing and a thing that he did. So I've always said no, but now I would say never say never. Have you?
I've tried to do like when we did NaNoWriMo a few times, and there's nothing more humbling than a blank page. It's very intimidating. Shout out again to Mark. Mark is always like, you could just write that book about Kobo. And if you were saying, I was thinking there, you're more interested in the business of things, business books, you know, that's a whole different area that you could tap into there as well. But no, I have a wee little Substack just for like personal stuff, which is like a little toe dipping. But to write a book, especially like fiction, is, yeah, I think I'm so admirable of those that have that creative impulse and discipline to be able to do that. But I don't quite know what my story would be yet. But my mom doesn't really understand my job, so she tells everyone that I'm a writer, which I'm just like, no, I work with writers. You talked a little bit about, are you going to digitize some of your grandfather's work?
Yes, I would love to. I think, you know, they were written at a time where like I don't even have any of the digital files. And I know scanning and OCR and things can make it so much easier to get digital versions made. But I would still want the control of editing them, making sure that it represents what was there. It was also a very different time. So I think I would need to think of some content warnings that might need to be on it because yeah, I think someone writing books in the 60s in England maybe doesn't have the same cultural point of view that we have today. But it is something that I would love to do. It's also finding the time of all of the millions of things that we're all trying to do.
What a fun project to have, though. I would like to read those, and it would be fun to sort of revisit. And you're kind of, I guess it goes back to like the importance of IP, right? This is your grandfather's IP that can be revived even past these publications. So that's really exciting. I hope that we get to see it one day. Mm-hmm. And if we go back to Kobo and Kobo Writing Life, if an author, we talked a little bit about burnout, and they're having to wear so many hats as like the writer, sometimes all of the marketing, maybe doing editing, cover design if they're not outsourcing some of that stuff yet. So when it comes to focusing energy on where to publish, I know we often talk about you can kind of go one route with exclusivity or another route where you're publishing everywhere. What's the biggest advantage of an author coming to Kobo?
I think the biggest benefit to being on Kobo is really the global reach and that you retain control of your rights. But I do think a bigger question that authors should be asking is why they have to choose in the first place. Because every author should be able to have their books available to every reader possible. I think that's how most publishers operate today, and that's how authors should be given permission to be able to do the same. They should be able to distribute their books freely wherever they choose.
Yeah, it is sort of a thing that we've just come to accept, like that's the way things are. But you're right that publishers don't have to be stuck into choosing exclusivity or not. And now that the lines are sort of blurring as more people are like hybrid or publishers are using self-publishing tools, it's like an interesting space to be in to really question the why. Because especially with Kobo Plus, I think it shows that non-exclusivity is really just successful. It helps the authors earn more. It's beneficial for everyone. I'm curious to get some of your insights as well, because, there's so much data at Kobo. Like, you could read things in so many ways, but having your expertise and insights of diving into it, just curious if you can talk about like genres that we think are trending upward that might be interesting for authors, or if there's any like sleeper categories that you think an author should think about writing in.
I would echo what I said before about translations. I know that's not a genre, but as far as a category that writers should be exploring, I think they should absolutely be looking at that as part of their catalog. Romantasy continues to be huge. There's always, a new creature, new hybrid type thing coming through. Something that I'm increasingly seeing that the traditional industry is starting to pay attention to, that I see a lot of self-published authors reading, is like non-monogamy storylines within romance. I think that's a really interesting area that we were seeing at Wattpad too. I think it's fascinating to see how at Wattpad, we had a much younger user base, and we would regularly be talking about, mermaids are the new vampires, and we would constantly do a werewolves versus vampire trend chart of like where things were higher. And I think some things that we see here remain evergreen. Werewolf stories continue to do well and will regularly be reinvented. And it's been really interesting to see this rise of romantasy and really how indie authors are really pushing the boundaries and trying new things there as well.
Tell me more about this at Wattpad then, because I wonder, do you see it where, because it's a younger audience, does it trickle through? So are some of the things that were popular at Wattpad before and now becoming like quote unquote mainstream in the popularity? Is there any trends that have surprised you that they haven't taken off in a more traditionally published way or anything like that?
Yeah, I think something that I continue to be fascinated with is the blurring of the lines of fan fiction, which of course we've started to see since 50 Shades of Grey, but continues to be explored in other fandoms, and even looking at things like Heated Rivalry, which also has its roots in fandom. I think that there is still a bit of a stigma there that I think authors are continuing to unpack and play with. In many ways, fan fiction is more just the seed of inspiration, and it continues to go in other directions, and it's a completely original piece of storytelling. Something that I used to talk a lot about at Wattpad was the fact that in the same way that young musicians would learn to play covers, or when you're going to art classes, you learn to imitate different painters' styles. In some ways, because everything's online now, we're watching things that authors have always done play out very publicly. And I think there is a lot of interest to that and value of like, that can be the first draft, or that can be the version of inspiration, but it is still your story and your original work. And I think we'll continue to see many different fandoms emerge in self-published content today.
Nice. And is there any, like, what's your preferred genre to read in? Is there anything that you're reading right now that you're pretty excited about?
Yeah, right now I'm reading a book by a Toronto author called Mother Clown. It's a young woman from Ontario who goes to Paris to study in 2007. So it very much had my number from the beginning. It's by Harriet Alita is her Instagram name, so I don't remember her full last name, but Mother Clown is the title, and I've been very excited to read that one. I also just read a nonfiction book that's a few years old called A Marriage at Sea. It's a nonfiction book about a couple that gets shipwrecked and floats in the Pacific Ocean for 120 days, and it was just riveting. I tend to have very eclectic reading tastes. I go a lot by recommendations, and again, I think my time at Wattpad and seeing so many people writing just to express themselves, it really had me interested in reading books by people that I know in a different way. It's always amazing to see how they represent certain parts of their life. So anytime I have a friend or an acquaintance that writes a book, I'm always eager to read that as well, to see how they express their views of the world in their fiction.
I love that. And it is kind of wild to me that word of mouth is still the greatest bookseller. Like, even within this world of algorithms and everything, I'm like, yeah, it's always, I don't know, if you'll recommend a book, Deandra, our content sales lead, those are the books that you're sort of downloading the quickest. So yeah, it's kind of wild. We talked a little bit about translations and Kobo being a global platform, but is there any international market that you think that indie authors are undervaluing right now?
I think I wouldn't necessarily they're undervaluing it more. It's like, are they even aware of what a powerhouse this is? It's hard to talk about Kobo's international stance without mentioning the Netherlands, because that's been what's most impressive to me coming back this year. In the Netherlands, we're partnered with bol.com, which is the leading e-retailer of the region that sells so many books. And even in English language, because people in the Netherlands are so multilingual, authors can be very successful in that market with their English language titles. I think it would only accelerate that. I would say to authors, if you're seeing success there, you should absolutely invest in your own translations in that market, or reach out to us to talk at Kobo Originals, because I think there's so much more potential that authors can have in that region.
I know it's definitely one that people probably don't even think about, but the Dutch reading market is such a huge one for us. And I always, whenever we're chatting to authors and showing them like charts of where their Kobo Plus books are being read or anything, it's always the Netherlands being so high. Like, there's a reason that we launched Kobo Plus there and continue to do so well there. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that market. I think it's a really interesting one. And as we're kind of like talking about indie publishing, it's very hard to talk about it and to talk about things in the current state without bringing up AI. It is the elephant in the room that we should address. And MT recently described AI as either salt or plutonium for authors. Plutonium is deadly in the smallest quantities. Its presence means death for anything that it touches, whereas salt, on the other hand, can be good or bad, depending on how much of it that you use. It could be useful or deadly. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's such a hot button issue right now, and it's led to many very interesting discussions in the office. I really loved that piece that MT wrote, and I would encourage authors to look at what Michael Tamblyn has said about AI and authors, because it is really difficult questions that we're all trying to deal with. And I understand why authors, and I wouldn't say all authors, but many authors are very anti-AI, because the models being trained on their words without permission. A lot of authors are still very hurt by that and are very anti-AI in any quantities, and I absolutely understand that stance. There's also lots of authors that are using it in very small ways for research or for inspiration, or even almost just like as a conversational partner to work through plot points, where it is still their work and their words in a way that I think can't be dismissed. Something that I like how Michael Tamblyn framed it is that, on one end we have the fully human written prize winners, the, Nobel Prize, like literature. And then on the other side, we have what people have been referring to as AI slop. And I think we kind of agree, one is good and one is kind of bad or just disappointing for any reader. And then there's just such a huge gray area in the middle that we're all really trying to calibrate on. I think as we're having these conversations internally, what's important for me to know is that so many published authors and publishers are starting to use AI in some of their workflows. And I would never want us to make a rule that treats a traditional author and a self-published author differently. I think we are still very much looking at things in a very fair way. But I also think all of our content policies are very geared towards what readers want and creating a good experience for readers. So one of the guiding truths we've had is not making it a disappointing experience for the readers of Kobo.
Yeah, that's always what I like to think of with the focus when it comes to any content decisions. We're not wanting to disappoint a reader. We're not wanting to have to refund them. It's such hard one time that in a world where everything is so distracting, to carve out the time to spend just reading, it's quite radical. You're really spending that time to not get souped into the news or any other notification. So anything that could disrupt that by it being a disappointing experience. And that's not what we at Kobo want, because we're just about the books and the selling. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's great to hear how MT is kind of leading our thinking in that piece as well. And hopefully it's helpful for the listeners here to hear these internal debates as well. We might not have the answers right now, but it's ever evolving, and kind of welcome the feedback on that piece as well. In a world now that there are just more books that exist online than ever before, what would your advice be for indie authors to stand out in this moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we already talked about discoverability being such a big problem today. I think the best thing that authors can do is to be authentic to themselves, especially when we're talking about how formulaic and how much content can be produced through AI. Something that we're talking a lot about internally, not about writing, but about our own roles, is what are the things that only we can do, and how can we be more efficient to free up all of that time? And in the same way, I think for authors, what is the thing that only you can do? That's the question that you should be asking. Like, your voice and your lived experience is the thing that AI will never be able to recreate. And I think that's something that stands out to so many people as authentic. And I think having that connection and keeping your reader in mind is also something that a robot can't do in the same way. So I would really encourage authors to really focus on, again, their own voice and why they are the right one to write that story.
I love that. And as we're coming to the end of our conversation, I have a twofold question here. If you had to give advice to an author that was starting today and wanting to make it in indie publishing, and then the same question for somebody that has been around for 15 years, maybe the answer is the same, but just wondering what advice you would give them.
Yeah, I think going back to the message of just audience building, that's the most durable thing you can do, is build your audiences, because the algorithms and the platforms might change. We didn't have TikTok 15 years ago. Now we have that. There's going to be a new platform around tomorrow. Instagram's going to change their algorithm. Like, know your audience and don't overinvest in one place in the same way you probably shouldn't overinvest in one retailer. I think authors should also, particularly the ones that have been around for so long, maybe in the early part of this self-publishing revolution where the power imbalance was very different, is also to know how powerful self-published authors are today. Michael Tamblyn regularly talks about how Kobo Writing Life is equivalent to one of the big 5 publishers. Like, authors are the engine of digital publishing. And I think that authors have more leverage than they realize. I think that they should be experimenting with ways that they can reach readers on their own terms across all platforms, because they should be everywhere that readers are.
I love that. That's why it's been such a pleasure having you kind of back at Kobo with this expertise and really like author forward thinking. And I love the idea of them being an engine for change as well, because it can be so isolating, but like, you know, change happens when people come together. So that's really great. Is there anything that you wanted to mention before we wrap things up? Anything else that I missed or we didn't cover?
I just wanted, again, to congratulate on 400 episodes and just to express how happy I am to be back here. I know I've been around for over 6 months now being back, but I think working at Kobo in those early days shaped so much of how I view authors and the reading community, and I'm so excited to come back and continue that work of supporting them here.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Tara.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us on social. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. This episode was hosted by Tara Kremen with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music is composed by Tearjerker. And a huge thanks to Ashleigh for being a great guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.